Hey, here we are. It's about the power of touch this weekend as we go into Matthew's Gospel, chapter 9. Matthew's story begins with Jesus is on his way to make an emergency house call. And there was a little girl who was in a grave state, and her father implored Jesus to come. We are told that a large crowd of the curious followed Jesus. Some were hoping he would succeed, others that he would fail. Most probably got caught up in the excitement of the parade. The parade. We are told that for 12 years she had been suffering from a bleeding hemorrhage. Mark tells us that she had already been to all the doctors and she had only gotten worse. And besides that, they had taken all her money. Interestingly, Luke, who was a physician, tells this story as well, but he could not bring himself to tell that side of the story. Call it, professional pride, but he is not about to say that she was taken for all her money by a long string of doctors. So here we have a story that's considered a sandwich story. We start with the calling of Matthew to be one of the apostles. That's a very strange thing because he is a tax collector. And then somebody else comes to talk about their daughter, and on their way, we have this lady with the hemorrhage. How is she supposed to get the attention of Jesus? Her problem was a very personal nature, and she did not want to discuss the issue publicly. And according to the Levitic law, recall there's a whole bunch of them, 613, a woman who was bleeding was considered unclean and under law, could not touch anyone. There were many ancient taboos. She did not want to have to go through the disciples to see Jesus. She wanted the doctor and not the nurse. She thus devised a plan. Having heard the stories of Jesus' power, she declared, "If I but touch the hem of his garment, I will be healed." And we smile and we say, wow, isn't that naive? But we do the same thing, don't we? We think of people that we love and we hold on to something that they last touched or wore. And she reached out from the crowd and touched the garment of Jesus. And immediately he stopped and bolted upright and asked, "Who touched me?" Well, the disciples were taken aback. Was this some kind of rhetorical question? Who touched you? Look around, Master. Everyone is touching you. And the New English Version quotes their words as being, what is the purpose in asking? Now, that woman knew her Hebrew scriptures. She knew that it was all the way back in the Hebrew scriptures in Leviticus and Numbers that it talked about if you just touch the hem of the Master's, of the Messiah's garment, you will be healed. And Jesus replied with one of the most mysterious lines in the Bible. He said, "I felt power flow from me." For years, I have been mesmerized with that verse. What exactly happened in that moment? Did the lady drain, his battery? It sounds as though he is almost describing a power surge. I felt power flow through me. Whatever happened, the important matter, of course, is that in the midst of the crowd, Christ felt the touch of a single person. Don't ever say that in the enormity of the cosmos, God cannot care about my concerns, your concerns. Not only does God care, he actually solicits our concerns. "Come unto me, all ye who are in labor and heavily laden, and I will give you peace." "Daughter," said Jesus. This is the only time that Jesus uses that term. "Your faith has made you well." And we are told she was immediately healed. The desperation of her faith thus became the channel that led her to her healing. The story is saying that there are two kinds of touch. The first being, physical touch. So often when Jesus wanted to transmit his power of love, He physically touched people. The man born blind and the children of Jerusalem being two examples. An embrace, a kiss, an arm on the shoulder, pat on the back. All of these are ways of expressing a love which goes beyond words. It is lamentable that we are today so paranoid on this subject in America. We have grown touchy about touching. In other parts of the world, they do not seem to have this hang up. And to me, the guideline that we can use for this from the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes, you recall the familiar verses that they read, there is a time to live, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up that which has been planted, a time for peace and a time for war, a time for touch and a time to refrain from touching, as we did all during COVID. A sage person will appreciate the difference. I lament the politically correct world that we have created where no one is allowed to touch in a professional setting. I can tell you no minister, no teacher, no boss will ever get close to a person who he is unwilling to physically touch. Touch communicates far more than words are able. You will never draw close to a person who you are unwillingly able to touch. If it's your wife, your child, your friend, your father, well, you touch them, you hug them. In ministry, we have to be so very carefully, if we are touching anybody, especially a sick person, a homeless person, an alcoholic, a terribly dirty person, we basically need to have a witness, someone within the distance to know we are not doing anything wrong. And the Menninger Institute in Topeka, Kansas, once had a fascinating experiment. They identified a group of crib babies who did not cry. Well, let me explain. It seems that babies cry because they instinctively know that is the way to get attention. Crying is their way of, calling out. These babies, however, had been in abusive situations. Their parents let them cry for hours on end and never responded. Do you know what happened? Well, they quit crying. It was almost as though they knew it was not worth trying. So the Menninger Institute came in for an experiment, and they got some people from retirement and even nursing homes. And every day these people held these babies and rocked them. The object was to get these children to start crying again. And it worked. Physical touch had made the difference. As important as physical touch is, there is yet another kind of touch, and it is even more important. It is the spiritual touch. This is the special touch that influences and impacts the lives of people. Telephone company some years ago had a slogan that you may recall, reach out and touch someone. They were, of course, referring to a meaningful relationship. Though I have never seen, those sequoia trees of California. When I did, I didn't know I saw them. The redwoods, they are spectacular, towering as much as 300 feet above the ground. And strangely, these, towering trees have unusually shallow root system that, kind of spider out from under the surface of the ground to catch much of the surface and moisture if they can. And this is their vulnerability. Storms with heavy winds would almost bring these giants crashing down to the ground, but this rarely happens because they grow in clusters and their intertwining roots provide support against the storms. When we were there, and when we are all together as a family or a church, we provide this same support. Pain and suffering come to all of us, but just like those giant sequoia trees, we can be supported in those difficult times by touch of one another's lives. The knowledge that we have someone that we are not alone, that there is someone who is willing to touch us, hold us, keeps us from being destroyed. We need to know that the roots of other people's lives are intertwined with ours. Years ago we had a neighbor, her name was Eva, and we never met the husband because we moved into the house after her husband had died. And one day she came over, and we were just all having breakfast together, and I reached over and just touched her, and she all of a sudden started to cry, and I was like, oh my gosh, what did I do? And she mentioned that nobody had touched her since her husband had died. Now, 2 of her children lived close by us, so they obviously were not the huggy-kissy kind of family. They kept their distance. They were very staunch and proper, I guess. How sad that she had never been touched in all those years. So if we are out of touch with people, then perhaps we are also out of touch with God. I have never believed that Bible studies and worship service in the church are as important as nurturing is. Programs are not designed to be an end in themselves. All of these things are to equip us and energize us to go out and touch the lives of people. I am a Christian social advocate, and I make no apologies about it. I believe that as the family of God, we are called to reach out and touch the lives of the least, the lost, the last, and the lonely. Why do I feel that way? Well, I guess it's because He touched me. And oh, the joy that floods my soul. Something happened within me. He touched me, and He made me whole. And the people said,